So last week in Grow Group, we finished going through the book of Judges. In 3 weeks, we covered all 21 chapters, reading it, every word, and discussing it together. But in our sermon series, we've only just finished chapter 7. So what are we going to do? Do we move on to the next book of the Bible? No, we're actually going to read it again. But why would we do that? Surely it's just repetitive. A friend told me about a deputy sheriff up in the city of Davis who was speaking about how he does his chair time. He's not a pastor, he's not a leader, he doesn't consider himself a very smart man. He just starts at the beginning of the Bible, reads a few chapters, the next day he reads some more, then reads some more, works his way through to the end of the Bible, and then he just starts again. And I hear testimonies of people like this who just read through the Bible from front to back each year or over a couple of years. And every time they go through, they are amazed at how much more they understand of the Bible, how clear it is to them, and the new things they were able to pull out. And this is testified to in the Bible as well. The Bible wasn't written to be understood the first time you read it. I mean, what a relief, right? The basic message can be understood because anyone can read John 3:16 just once, and that's enough for the Spirit to work in them so they can believe. But as we grow in our faith, we need to dig deeper into the Bible to know more of Scripture. And we do that by reading on it more and more and meditating on what we read. And by meditating, I don't mean yoga kind of meditation where you try and empty your mind. Instead, you're trying to fill your mind with the Scripture that you know, the stories that you know, the truths that you know, so they can percolate and you can mull over them in your mind. And so you can understand how they're all connected together and tell the same story of the God who loves us. In Joshua chapter 1, where God is calling Joshua to be strong and courageous, right in the center, he says this: "Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." And right at the beginning of the book of Psalms, we read these words: "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers." And in Psalm 119 we read this: "I reach out for your commands which I love, that I may meditate on your decrees. Oh, how I love your law. I meditate on it all day long." And with the book of Judges, hopefully you've seen that it's been written very deliberately with these repeating cycles and repeating phrases to help us understand the overall story that the nation of Israel are becoming more and more like the Canaanites they were meant to expel from the land. But there are also hyperlinks within the book of Judges that point us to other scriptures as well. Maybe you spotted one last week as we read the story, the horrible story of the Levite whose wife was raped and killed in Gibeah in Benjamin. That started that civil war that happened. Hopefully some of you will have realized that that story sounds very similar to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The verbiage is almost identical. And the author of Judges wanted them to realize this main point, that the nation of Israel had become just as bad as Sodom and Gomorrah, whom God destroyed. In other words, Israel deserves the same punishment. But you probably wouldn't see that connection if this is your first time through the book of Judges, especially if this is your first time through the Bible. It takes a growing familiarity with these stories to see these links between them. It can take meditation and reflection on the things you've heard in sermons, in grow group studies, and in your chair time over months and years of growing as a Christian. And so that's why we want to go through the book of Judges again. We want these stories to become familiar to us. We want to understand both the big picture of the book of Judges, but also each of these individual stories. And so that's why we want to read it again together. And hopefully this time through, you'll get greater understanding. Hopefully you won't be as lost as the first time through. It's okay still to get a little lost or even a lot lost, but hopefully you'll get less lost than last time. And hopefully, because we've gone through the first 7 chapters of Judges in our sermons, we've taken a deep dive into those, you'll be able to glean a lot more because we've already gone through them in depth. For example, the first time we read through Judges chapter 5 with Deborah's song, it may have made no sense to you, and that's okay. But last week we saw Nick do a deep dive into that chapter, help us understand what it's trying to do in its key parts. So hopefully as you read it again this time, it will be clearer to you and make more sense. And with your discussions that you have after reading the passage, it might be that you're discussing some of the same topics you discussed the first time around. And so this time I want you to dig deeper into those topics. If it's a truth about God, I want you to be asking the questions of, do I really believe this about God? Or how would my life be different if I believed it more? We don't want to just look for surface level answers, like you're just trying to pass a test. We want to really discuss these things, challenge one another, and challenge our own lives to see how we could be believing them more. Or if it's a sin that we see the nation of Israel commit, we don't want just to think how bad they are because they did these things. We want to seriously consider them for ourselves and ask, how do we treat God the same? How do we treat other people the same? We want to think carefully about our lives and think critically about our lives, not just skimming the surface, but trying to dig deep and allowing the book of Judges to be that mirror onto our own lives. So this time, as we read through this first part of Judges, we're going to do it slightly differently to last time. Firstly, last time we read through chapters 1 through 9, which took the best part of an hour. And some of the feedback we got from groups is, why not break it up into 3 equal sections of 7 chapters? And the reason we didn't do that is because that's not where the story naturally breaks. Gideon's story goes from chapters 6 through 9. And so if we ended at the end of chapter 7, we'd be ending in the middle of a story. But this time we're going to go through chapters 1 through 8. Chapter 9 is kind of a end story of Gideon as we look at Gideon's son Abimelech and all the trouble he causes. And it's by far the longest chapter in the book of Judges, adding about 10 minutes to the read time. And so this week I encourage you to read chapters 1 through 8, and next week we'll read chapters 9 through 16. That should even the read time out and leave plenty of time for discussion in your groups. Another suggestion for your group is that this time as you read through the book of Judges, rather than having a different person read each page, split it up into chapters instead. We had some feedback from some groups that reading a page at a time for each person made people more want to follow along with the text and make sure they were ready to read when it's their turn, rather than actually listening to the passage, looking at the maps, and being able to note things down that went along. And so this time through, have each person read a whole chapter. And if you're not reading, you can just listen. Maybe write things down as you hear them rather than worrying where to underline the right thing. Look at the maps as well, especially as we read chapter 1 again, where there's lots of place names. Most of them are listed on the map, and seeing the map might make you not feel as lost. I guess that's what maps are for. And if the person is reading, they can just say page to turn the page, so you make sure you're staying along. And if there's a little break between each chapter, that's okay, as the person finds their place. Feel free to keep doing it the way you have been doing it so far, but also feel free for your group to try different things. There's no right or wrong way of doing this. Our goal is just to get as best understanding of this crazy book of the Bible called Judges as we can.